الحمد لله الذي خلق السماوات والأرض وجعل الظلمات والنور سبحان الله الذي علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم ونحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So let me begin by laying out a couple of points as to what and what not to expect from these lectures, from these sessions. So, Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, Allama Iqbal's magnum opus in prose. It is, while quite essential for understanding Iqbal's opinion, his thought, his viewpoints on an array of subjects, it is probably also one of the densest books out there. In terms of the number of references that it makes to works on psychology, philosophy, theology, history, and a whole spectrum of the subjects. So there are a couple of things which we will do which we will keep in view while reading through this. First of all, this consists of 7 lectures that Iqbal delivered at different places. I won't go into the history of that. One thing is that we are not going to study this book in a thematic manner. It's not going to be a lecture-wise study. We are going to read this book word by word, statement by statement. So there are 2 things in this regard that I'll keep in my mind while doing that. One is that I'll try to keep things rather simple due to just the sheer density of this book. When I say simple, I just mean that, for example, when Iqbal refers to a particular philosopher, there might be a whole system of philosophy that philosopher has developed in his own right. So it is very easy to digress out of proportion while trying to explore the depths of that philosophy and while trying to make sense of that. So we won't be doing that. We will keep things to a particular level of understanding, which is good enough, which is sufficient for a grasp of this text, but no more. So there might be some compromise on details in favor of simplicity. Secondly, it's not going to be, let me put it this way, it's not going to be a heavily critical study of Iqbal. So there might be places where there are counter-arguments, where there are parallel theories on a particular topic, a particular subject. But first we are going to, in this first read-through at least, we are going to study Iqbal's thoughts, his ideas, on his terms. And once we have developed a sufficient grasp of his theories, then we can do another study into the critical analysis of some of his thoughts. There might be exceptions for both of these cases. If needs be, if we feel that there is a need, we might hold separate sessions in order to understand the philosophy or philosophical system of one particular philosopher, or if the references to, for example, say, scientific concept like relativity, we can probably hold another session entirely dedicated to that. And similarly, we can hold sessions on the critical analysis of particular thought that Iqbal presented, in which we can, at the least, present the alternate, the parallel theories to that of Iqbal, and check out some of the counter-arguments which have been presented over the time. So, I will start from the preface. I think it is quite important, and it will also give us context to read the rest of the text. While doing that, there might be places where we might end up spending multiple sessions on a single statement, and there might be places, of course, where we can cover the whole page in a single session as well. We will start out slow, and we'll pick up the speed as we go along, because in the start we might come across a lot of terms that Iqbal uses and reuses throughout the lectures, the 7 lectures. And we have to establish the definitions from Iqbal's perspective in the start, in the beginning, and later on, whenever such terms recur, we can simply refer back to these initial sessions. So, any questions thus far? You guys are welcome to intervene with a question or a pressing thought or an opinion or an objection, anything. It will be your guideline along the way.
Who named these lectures, this name, and anything you would like to say about this?
We will, but not in the beginning. I feel that it usually ends up becoming a digression, trying to explain the title, because that title has the whole text in its detail. So rather than looking at the detail and then seeing why this particular title was given, there are a couple of peculiarities about the title. Why is it only the reconstruction of thought? And there are many other questions that we can address, but only after we have begun our journey into the book, at least a little bit. Maybe at the end of first lecture, we will have a proper idea of what Iqbal's mission is and what he's trying to do here. In the preface, he also answers this question, what his main purpose and objective is throughout these lectures. So probably we can take a look at that time. We can take a jab on this title once then, and then later on probably, when we are at the end of the first lecture. So the preface of the book starts with, again, a rather peculiar statement. It says, the Quran is a book which emphasizes deed rather than idea. It's a very famous statement. And the unfortunate thing about this statement is that it often attracts agreement and admiration even before the person is able to really appreciate and comprehend its proper meaning and purpose. Partly probably due to its poetic element, the poetic quality. But for the same reason, probably it also has attracted some criticism. So, for example, for the ordinary comprehension of the words deed and idea, a person who is not sufficiently trained in philosophy might think of it as, think of this statement as saying that Quran is a book that does not concern itself with ideas as such. Now, what's more, if a person is inclined to think that these two are the only locales in which Quran's entire teaching can be placed, either in the category, either categorized as a deed or as an idea, then some questions arise. For example, what about faith? What about Iman? Is it a deed or is it an idea? The usual answer to that question is that it has to be an idea. That is the usual conclusion that a person who is not well trained, or is not, or who is taking this statement out of context in isolation, he would reach. And then, of course, it hits certain difficulties right away, very obvious ones, like if Iman is an idea and Quran is, so the statement is claiming that Quran does not really concern itself with idea as such, it does not concern itself with faith as such. So, in order to really appreciate this statement, we will first try to understand the meaning of deed and idea from Iqbal's perspective, and then we can try to look into its validity, whether it does get corroborated or not from Quran. Is it well aligned to the spirit of Quran or not? And then we can look into its purpose, why it is the opening statement of a book that is full of ideas. So it is like undermining itself in the start. Before understanding, though, these two terms, deed and idea, and how they interact with each other, and where to place faith and Iman across these two domains, let me get one point out of the way. The use of the word emphasis in this particular line, I'll read the statement again. The Quran is a book which emphasizes deed rather than idea. So the word emphasis itself implies that this is about a comparative priority of the former over the latter. It's not about an outright exclusion of the latter as such. So what Allama is trying to say here is that Quran stresses more on deed than it does on idea. So for example, I might give 5 different instructions to my class, and I really emphasize on 2 of them. It wouldn't mean that the rest of the 3 are not important enough. It would just mean that those are important, they still hold, only these 2 are even more important, and I'm stressing more on them, at least in a given particular context. So this statement has to be taken as Quran stresses more on deed rather than idea. And then we can see what deed and idea are, where faith is placed, how it interacts with these 2 things, and so on. So let me just write down these 2 categories. Pardon my writing. Deed and idea. So what do you guys think about this? Any initial thoughts? What kind of things would be included in idea? Because there are people, and there are people of good intellectual standing, who have claimed faith to belong to either of these, either to idea or deed. More are inclined towards idea than deed. So let us start with that. We're going to just entertain all different viewpoints. So Iman, anything else? In relation with religion and without. So you can just throw in anything.
Existence of God.
Existence of God. So basically you mean the proof of the existence of God. The reasoning for the existence of God. Okay. So
so all the metaphysics would be count as deed, or idea would be, I think, idea.
All the metaphysical things.
Is that the distinction Iqbal is trying to make here between deed and idea? The physical things and
Probably not, because metaphysicality, I would like to do away with that term only because it is such a loaded term. Metaphysicality, even the principles and rules that we obey every day, the principles by which we would perform any particular action, those principles also kind of are metaphysical in a way. So that will probably, I can for example write it down in a different way. If you like it, I can say philosophization. Reasoning, philosophization. Anything else? In terms of religion, for example, the belief system, like maslak, maybe. For example, if you are a Shafi'i or where you believe, a Hanafi, or if you what kind of system of fiqh you believe in, and all the details thereof.
direct orders from God that we do deeds.
They'll be in directives for deeds, yes. So we will get to that. We will get to that as well. And similarly, there is Aqidah. Aqidah relates to the theological school of thought that one follows, like the Ash'arites, like Mu'tazila. So these are different schools of Aqidah. As the Aqidah as the term is used nowadays. In English, it is usually referred to as creed. And we're using these terms very loosely. We're not going to go into the subtleties of this term and how to establish demarcations between one term and another, because this is not really the basic point here. The point is elsewhere. This is just the the means to the point. So yeah, all these things. What about deed? Simple enough in itself, but still, if you want to put something in there.
Rituals, actual rituals or religious rituals.
Rituals, okay. Rituals. So we do not have to stick to religion only. You can also just talk in plain terms. What comes to your mind when we use the word, the notion deed? So any action, any other things? Okay, we'll leave it for later. So these are all these things. Now, if we take this statement in isolation, one person can, of course, interpret it in any of these ways. You can interpret idea in any of these ways. So we have to take help from the context of it. Let us see what the next statement says. It says, there are, however, men to whom it is not possible organically to assimilate an alien universe by reliving, as a vital process, that special type of inner experience on which religious faith ultimately rests. I will reread the first statement and the second one in that context. Quran is a book which emphasizes deed rather than idea. There are, however, men to whom it is not possible organically to assimilate an alien universe by reliving that special type of inner experience on which religious faith ultimately rests. So, what this statement exactly means, we will leave that for a later session. But one thing is pretty obvious from this, that not only Iqbal is using faith as something outside these both categories, this statement, he's also giving its due importance to it. So there's another statement right in the start of Lecture 1. Let me also quote that for you. Iqbal says in probably the first paragraph of Lecture 1, the essence of religion is faith. And then also that faith, like the bird, sees its trackless way unattended by the intellect. So intellectual activities, obviously they belong to the ideas, right? What we think about, all the reasoning and everything. So in these two statements, he makes it pretty clear that faith does not have much to do with the idea, at least in its essential, basic, fundamental definition. So we can remove Iman from here, write it down as a separate thing. Let me call it faith for now. So we established that when Iqbal is saying Quran is a book that emphasizes on deed rather than idea, then by idea, he's not talking about faith, at least. So that much is established. So we have put faith out as a separate thing from these two categories, deed and idea. And idea remains to be for now, and we can revisit it later if we have to alter the definition a bit. Idea for now is, let me also, we not have enough space, is the act of thought, you can say. The act of ideation and philosophization, even imagination, even speculation, all these things, any, you can say, purely intellectual pursuits, and the act of our intellectual consciousness that will all be part of this category of idea. So I'll just write, for simplicity, intellectual pursuits. Okay. So, now the question remains, is there a third category at all? You suggested that we should first go through deed, the notion of deed, what Iqbal means by that, and to see if faith fits there or not. And we will do that in a minute. But first, can we see that if there is a third category or not? So that will just make it easier to relate faith to either of these two categories, because we will have something to compare these two. First we had the idea, and the initial natural response has been that faith might be a part of the idea. Now we have moved that out of question, then we are left with just deed. So
in my opinion, I think what he means by deed, I could be wrong, of course. What he means is the deed is a synthetic, synthetic act which of course includes the thoughts, but it's not like you just leave the idea and intellectual activity completely out of the act.
Right. And we never do that. So human beings and reality as such, all these things, they are a continuum, if you like. We all have this natural continuous flow of being. So none of these things is unrelated to another. But when we are doing analytical study, we have to still make some boundaries to understand each of these things separately. So definitely ideas are part of deeds, and ideas do drive deeds as well. Deeds give you some new ideas as well. Everything is related to everything else. But we have to keep the separate entities for our better and easier analysis. Third thing that comes to my mind, which Iqbal does speak about in one way or the other, is a state. So we have ideas, which are thoughts and the intellectual pursuits, and then we are doing something. We have deeds. We will revisit that definition of deed as well again, and we will probably try to enrich it a bit. And then we are in a particular state. You can also say that we have kind of feelings. So faith, in my view, and I will get to the point why faith cannot be deed, why faith cannot be idea again. In my view, faith is a state. And I'll just explain why in a little bit. Let's put in a new category here. Now we have deeds, idea, and state. Faith as its essential element has a feeling. In very simple terms, a feeling of trust, you can say. It's a state of trust and believing in something. And when we say essential element, in coming back to your point, when we say essential element, it is not to exclude the rest of the elements at all. It's not to say that this is the only element that is found in this particular category. So, for example, I might say that any drink, like water, like something else, is essentially a liquid. Now, that is the property which it has to carry in order to be a drink. There might be some other such properties as well. But remove that property and it wouldn't be a drink anymore. But it does not mean that a drink cannot have solid substance in it. For example, you have a fruit juice, we call it a drink, and it has pulp, which is partly solid. We have fizzy drinks, which have particles of gas in it. So these things are not excluded when we say that a drink is essentially a liquid. Similarly, functionally speaking, a drink might be hot or cold. These are many different qualities that it can acquire. It will not change it being a liquid. Right? So, similarly, faith in its essential element, in its essential definition, it is a feeling. So, we like to call this thing, we like to categorize feelings as a state in which we are. So, now looking back at the different arguments, why faith cannot have idea as an essential element, why faith cannot have deed as an essential element. Let us go through that once. If, let us say, if thought was the essential idea of faith, essential element of faith, then that is all that faith would be. Thoughts come and go, ideas come and go. I might have this idea now and that idea later on. Faith, by definition, is something more enduring than that. It is something firmer than that, something that I hold on to with a higher conviction. So thought cannot be the essential element of faith. It cannot define faith. Faith is a feeling that endures over a long period of time. Similarly, if we say that reasoning is the essential idea, is the essential element of faith, then it will probably boil faith down to knowledge. In its in the usual established definition of knowledge, which is belief that has a justifiable reason for it, which can furnish an evidence for its truthfulness. That is knowledge. We will revisit the definition of knowledge as well, because that term is used quite heavily by Iqbal in the rest of the lectures. So the reasoning cannot be the essential element of faith as such, if we want to differentiate faith from knowledge. In fact, it reminds me of Thomas Aquinas, who used to say that faith is between knowledge and opinion, because it has the conviction of knowledge, it has the endurance of knowledge, yet it can only furnish the evidence of an opinion. So, before going to the deed part, there might be, I know there's kind of objections to this conception. There might be a normative discussion of how faith should be like, whether faith should rely on reasoning or not, whether it should follow reasoning or not, and it should be more like knowledge or not. So there are all kind of extremes when it comes to faith. So, for example, for one person, faith might be unreasonably unshaken, even in face of a plethora of reasoning and evidence against it. And for the other person, it might sway every whim of thought. The right approach might be somewhere in the middle of these two extremes. But that is not only out of the scope for our study, it is also quite irrelevant for us. Because the point here is not how faith ought to be. It is how faith is. For a normal approach to faith, for a normal person, for a normal attitude, faith endures in the face of reasoning otherwise. It does not right away change itself, it does not right away gets refuted and overridden. It endures as a state of trust, of belief, as a feeling. So that is what faith usually is, and that is those are the terms in which we want to define faith here. Now, there are also some views in which faith is equated to deed. That faith is actually in its essential nature, it is deed. And it might not be very difficult to show why that cannot be so. So, for example, you might have a faith in, let us say, a planet called Abracadabra in a parallel realm. I know Kaf is quite fond of these things. So, dwelled in by all kind of fairy creatures. And you might go on living your life without any particular character transformation out of this faith. You might have a faith in reincarnation or otherwise, and you might live your whole life without it inspiring a particular action or mode of actions. So faith has to be disconnected from deed on those very simple grounds. As I said earlier, it is not to say that these things are not related. We are again talking only about the very essential definitions of things, very essential elements of these things. Now, there might be times when your faith is inspiring particular thoughts, when your faith transforms your character and motivate and drive you to particular actions. There might be interaction between the deed and idea as well, in the same way. But these remain different, these remain separate in their essential character and their essential functioning and their essential definition. And faith, parenthetical note, faith remains more fundamental than the rest two. Because nothing moves you and motivates you to, for example, do something like faith, no idea, no reasoning can really inspire you to an action like faith does. And that is probably the reason why all the politicians and motivational speakers and all the social campaigns, they try to inspire your emotions and your feelings rather than trying to appeal purely to your logical reasoning. There was one more term in the second statement that I read from the preface. So, I will read it again for you. So, the Quran is a book which emphasizes deed rather than idea that we are looking at. And the second statement was, there are, however, men to whom it is not possible organically to assimilate an alien universe by reliving as a vital process that special type of inner experience on which the religious faith ultimately rests. So, experience is another term here that Iqbal has coined. I probably laid these out slightly wrongly. But experience. What do you guys think of experience? How would you define experience? Any random thoughts about experience?
The result you get from doing a certain deed.
The results you get from certain deed. That's a nice view of it. Yes?
Essential part of deed.
Essential part of deed. Okay. You were right about experience being an outcome of deed as well. So these two things, they go hand in hand. Like most of the deeds, or rather all deeds, they end up at some experience. They give you that input, that experience. And most of the experience happens by way of some deeds. So they're quite similar for us to be differentiated or separated into two different categories. So I'm inclined to put them in one category here. And let us say that for differentiation, for distinction, deed is something more outward. It's an outward activity that you perform. And experience is more inward. The notion of experience, at least, it is more inward in terms of reception. So when we say deed, we usually mean an activity. And when we say experience, the focus of this notion is on the gain, the input that we have gathered out of some experience. Now, I'm quite inclined, quite tempted to call that gain knowledge, but we are yet to have the discussion. So let us say there is some sort of at least information or feeling or sensation, some sort of input is there whenever there is experience. So for now, we will try to deal with these three things as three separate categories. Idea on one side, which is based on basically all the intellectual pursuits, all the thoughts, anything that we can do using our intellectual faculty. Faith is a state. There can be other states. You can be in a particular emotional state, sentimental state. And there are some other states that Iqbal will use in his lecture. So this small teeny-weeny model is quite important in that regard. And then experience and deed would make a third category. These things, when we are defining these things, these are not final. We are doing this as we are going through the text. And at a later stage, if we see the need to alter them a bit, or to redefine them, to revisit them, we will keep doing that. So this exercise is a thorough read-through exercise in which we are doing it the way that one person who has a sufficient background in philosophy can read it for the first time. Next thing that we need to do about this particular statement is to see its validity, of course. Because there has been a lot of criticism on Iqbal due to this statement that it does not really align well with Quran. Again, usually on the basis that people make faith part of the ideas. But in any case, we have to see whether Quran corroborates this claim or not, that Quran is a book which concerns itself more with deed than idea. And after that, once we are done with the validation of this particular statement, we can then look into the reasons and the purposes of this statement occurring right in the start of this book, which is, as I said earlier, full of ideas. So the way to do the validation, way to inquire into, probe into the standing of the statement from Quran, in the light of Quran, would be the one way is the statistical approach. You guys can, for example, you guys can go through Quran and see how many times the concepts like reflect and contemplate and think and reason and these things, like the word fikr and its different variations and forms, how many times are those used, and compare that number to the frequency of the words amal and iman, and you will get some idea of what is being focused more and what is being focused. Like, it does not constitute a very solid argument either way. So it won't probably lead us to a conclusion, but it will still be a good indication. So that you can actually take away as your work. You can go to Quran, try to find these occurrences, their frequencies, and match these things, come back with a conclusion. I will, next time, in the next session, we will continue from here, and I will try to analyze this statement in a more critical and logical manner, and try to see where it stands with certain, in the light of certain verses of Quran, where it is talking about ideas, and it is talking about the deeds and amal. So I think that should suffice for today.